Hello, today on the Bioanxiety podcast, we have the lovely Lou, who is a postdoc in the microbiology department at NYU Langone. And you came here from Uruguay.
Yes.
But yeah, I'll let you take it away because it's your story.
Well, first, thank you for inviting me. This is very exciting. And yeah, I am from Uruguay in South America, and I am a scientist. Um, I did my undergrad and my master's in Uruguay. Then I moved to France, to Paris for my PhD. And then in February 2020, I came to New York City for my postdoc that it was meant to be on the viruses I was studying at the time, which were viruses transmitted by mosquitoes, the ones that give you like Zika virus or dengue virus diseases. But then COVID hit and everything changed.
And then you started working on the COVID vaccine or cure for that, right?
Yes, so not exactly the vaccine, but really at the time when it was March in New York City and it was all crazy, there were two options. Either everybody that wanted to keep on working had to work on COVID related stuff, or if you could not or didn't want to, you could just go home and do more like remote work, anything like this. For me, it was a no brainer. I had just gotten here, I had nothing to do in my house. Plus, for me, it was like this is maybe the first time that I can actually contribute directly to society with what I'm doing. So I was like, no, I'll start working on COVID 100%. I had experience also from my PhD working like with this type of viruses that required like enhanced biosafety. So I was trained on like how to work with the virus. So I started on that, and initially I was trying to like understand the way we react to the infection. Then we did a lot of trials with antivirals trying to see if we could find something. And then a few more things here and there, but that was it. And that lasted until 2023. That's when I finished my last COVID project, and now I work on influenza.
That's amazing. Very stressful times.
Yes, very stressful.
What made you want to go into science field in the first place?
So this is not like a motivational answer or inspiring. Really, it was like an accident. So to contextualize this, in Uruguay, the college system is very different from the one here, and probably other countries, in that you need to choose as soon as you finish high school what you want to do, like the school you want to go to. So, of course, you're a teenager at that time and your mind is anywhere.
Yeah.
Um, my problem was not I didn't like anything, it was quite the opposite. I liked a lot of things. So, I was interested in many things and I was considering a bunch of different things. At the end, I decided to go to the School of Sciences because it was the one closest to my house, so the shortest commute. So I was like, perfect. 18 years old me said, I'll go to that school. In the end, it worked out well because I really liked it. But that's my most honest answer.
That's awesome. I love it because most people are like, but when I was like 12 years old, I wanted to like
Yes,
this.
no, not for me at all.
Very, very honest. I love it.
Yeah.
So then you mentioned that you ended up doing your PhD in Paris, right? How was that? Like, so once you finished undergrad, is it the same undergrad in a way? Like,
Yes.
yeah, in Uruguay, how did you go about looking for these new programs? Or is this something just that was referred to you in Paris? Like, how did that work?
So also a little bit by accident. So after undergrad, I did my the School of Sciences, but I was also an English teacher that I did on the side, and I really loved that job. It was very fun. I was going every day with the kids. It was great. So at the time, for a long period of time, I didn't know if I wanted to be a scientist or a teacher. So I took a year off to see if I would decide. Of course, I did not decide anything at all. So I decided, okay, I'll start a master's that in Uruguay it's like part time. So I was working as a teacher and then doing this master's part time back home. And then one colleague in the lab I was at, he was being co-mentored by a, 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 a professor in France. So this professor came to Uruguay as part of the training of my colleague. And then I started talking to him. and it was a lot of fun and like good science and everything. And then when he left Uruguay, he said, if anybody would like to come to my lab to do like an internship, you're welcome. So this was in Paris in Pasteur Institute, which is very renowned. So I was like, me, absolutely. So I went for an internship and I absolutely fell in love. Like this was Paris in the summer in a great institute for 2 months. I had friends there. So, of course, I had the time of my life, and the science and the lab were great. And I got along very well with everybody there. So, I was like, this is where I want to be. Absolutely. This is where I want to do my PhD. So, after that, I talked to my who was going to be my boss, and I said, I really would like to stay. So, I applied for the international program for doctorates, like for PhDs from Pasteur Institute, and then I applied. I got the fellowship, and then I moved to France. That was it.
Was this like the first time leaving Uruguay? Like, how was that?
Yes.
Like, how was it that? I mean, I've never been to Uruguay, but
Yeah.
I know Paris. How was that? Like, how was like finding? How did you find it? Like when you first moved there, and was it scary? Because you were what 20?
I was 26,
Mhm.
and it was the first time leaving Uruguay and my parents' house.
Oh my
So it
god.
was a huge change. Um, I loved it. It was a lot of fun. So this program was very nice in that it was only meant at the time, at least, for international students. So it was quite well equipped to welcoming you and at least making the first 6 months easy for you. So they gave us housing, like in a student housing place, and then everybody that was getting there was starting at the same time, the same cohort, all foreigners. Nobody really had a lot of friends or know a lot of people. So that first part was really easier. After that, then I had to start finding a place of my own because after 6 months you had to leave, and then more, yes, visas and paperwork in French, which I barely spoke at the time. So that was more challenging. But I guess my main thing was always like I had so many people help me throughout all these things, like even to file my first taxes in a foreign country in French. That, and I feel so grateful for these people, and mostly these were colleagues, that I have always tried to replicate the same with the people that are coming from abroad, because I'm like, I was you at some point, and I know how confused you feel right now.
That's so nice. Yeah. I mean, it can be really hard, like, especially like when you're first leaving your parents' house. And I know
Yes,
in a lot of like Latin countries, even Italy, like, I mean, you don't leave your parents' house usually until you get married. So,
true, very true.
so now you're in New York.
Yes.
Do you want to talk a little bit how like you ended up in New York after Paris? Because you came here straight from France, right?
Yes, straight from France. So I finished my PhD and I stayed in the same lab for a little bit, but then I knew I wanted to do a postdoc. So my career in science went the opposite of what it usually goes. So for a lot of people, they love science. So they do their majors and then maybe masters or go to PhD. And then towards the end of their PhD, they are like, I don't want to stay in academia anymore. This is too, well, for whatever, there's a number of reasons why people may not like academia. Also, payment is not good, so fair
Mhm.
enough. And then people decide to move into industry or other kinds of jobs. I started my PhD saying, absolutely impossible, I'll stay in academia. I'll do my PhD and then I'm out. I like it, but I don't like it that much. I'm done. And then while I was doing my PhD, I completely changed my mind. So then I realized when I was reaching towards the end, I was like, no, I really want to keep on doing this. I really like the so the science I really like, but I also like the way it makes you think. The job per se, it has a lot of freedom. You can like study the things you like, but then also you travel a lot, get to know people from everywhere. You usually don't have a schedule, there's no routine. So I really like that. So I decided to start looking for a postdoc. And I had realized by the time that I loved France, but I it was like my time to move somewhere else. And the US is like the best country in the world to do science, probably. So I wanted to look for something in the US. I also knew I wanted to stay in the coasts. So then I went to a conference and I met this person that had her lab in New York. I talked to her. She was studying those viruses I was interested in. So then we set up after I mentioned I was like looking for a postdoc, and then we had an interview, and then she was like, okay, if you want to come, you can come. So then I, again, maybe a little bit by accident, I didn't interview a lot or anything like that. It was like, I like this. It's New York. That's where I want to go. I'll do it.
Well, it was meant to be, right?
Yeah.
Because if it wasn't, it wouldn't have happened. So I know also working in science can be pretty stressful. I know like sometimes you like handle mice too and stuff
Yeah.
like I couldn't do it. How like do you ever like suffer from like career anxiety when you get a new project and like how do you stay balanced? How do you beat that? Right? Because from moving from like Uruguay, then to Paris, then to France, to New York, that's like a lot of change, right? Like how do you balance that?
Yes. I think like as with everything, you start to learn it, and then also to understand what is good for you and what is not good for you. The PhD was a time that for me, I was having a little bit more of anxiety related to work because it was obviously a very big challenge. I only had 3 years for my PhD. That was the time for my fellowship, which I managed to do, but it was on its tight. And then I was starting in this new place, and for me, like I was working with the people that I had read their papers like in back home, and they were like my idols. I could never imagine. And then they were just sitting right next to me. So I felt like I had to keep up. Like these were like the real deal. So at the beginning, it was a lot of being quiet and trying to read a lot, trying to catch up with all the science. And I was worried because it was like, I will never be able to think in this way. There's a lot of imposter syndrome in science in general. And then there's a strong culture of working on the weekends, which I don't share at all. I mean, I still sometimes go on weekends. It's part of the job. Sometimes we handle mine, so maybe you need to go on the weekend to check that they're fine. But in especially in some labs, there's a strong culture towards always working on the weekends. It wasn't like that in my lab. My boss was not putting pressure, but I put all that pressure on me. So I felt like I had to go. And sometimes I went to do nothing at all, but I was just sitting there. There was a bunch of people, of course, because everybody felt that way. And the times when I did not go, I would stay home and I would have anxiety and feel guilty about not going to work, not being at work. So I would go maybe for 2 hours to really not do almost anything at all, but just be there. But then I felt good about myself. So obviously that's very toxic. And
Yeah.
I talked about it in therapy a lot, and it was like a big part of it. And then also finding hobbies or maybe things. At the beginning, I did not stay at home, for example. I went out and do something, and then that didn't give me any. I was not feeling guilty because I felt I was doing something. Nowadays, I can stay the entire weekend on my couch, and I'm fine with that. But that was the experience, 100%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, and let's talk a little bit more about hobbies because you said, like, I know you play soccer. I can
Yeah.
say that
Yeah. Yeah.
right. I know you play football even.
Yes.
Um, how do you, I guess, every city that you've gone to so far, how have you gone about like finding your community, new friends, new apartments? Because I mean, it's hard, right? Like,
Yes.
especially like you were saying in Paris that you didn't speak French. So,
No, not at all. So work has always been a big part of it. Both or all the institutions I've been usually had like a big part of international people. So they try to like create programs or activities that would contemplate all these people that are arriving in new place and don't do anything or don't know anything or anybody. So that was always my initial reach out, the going to whatever my work was proposing. But then yes, I always liked sports a lot, and I played different ones. But when I moved to France, I was debating what shall I do, and I decided to go for field hockey, which is something I've been doing my whole life, but mainly because it was a team sport. So I really wanted to find a team to make new friends, also make some friends outside of work, and actually that helped a lot. So I would say all my friends from France that are outside from work came from hockey. It's not a big sport at all, but the community, everybody knows each other and they organize tournaments and you travel. So I was yeah, maybe we were traveling the entire weekend to different parts of France with my teammates. And then, of course, we would play, but then we would go have dinner, go visit
Mhm.
around. So it was very fun. And then here, so that part was tougher because of COVID. So
Mhm.
all sports were canceled. So for here, I was lucky enough that a friend back home, her cousin, which is one of her friends, she was living here and she told me, here's her number, call her. So I did. And then she introduced me to a lot of people, which is very quickly, we became like a family because it was also COVID. So we were like, okay, we're hanging together. So this is what we are. We were seeing each other, always keeping it safe or everything. But yeah, so I think that experience, which was very traumatic, and we all know, but also helped me find like a very solid group of people that we bond a lot. And then yes, the sports came after 2021 when things reopened, and I as well I made more friends through that.
That's awesome. So, what kind of advice would you give somebody who's trying to make a decision about going into science, like what to study?
So I would say that nowadays a career in science opens a lot of doors. So really, you can the stereotype is like the scientist with the coverall and the goggles and that, but you can be that if you want, 100%. But also nowadays you can be anything. Like at work, there's all these programs like what to do with a PhD, and really you can take your career almost anywhere. There's some people in banking after getting their PhDs and this kind of thing, or in venture capital, but also science policy. Then yes, academic work more like tied to a lab. But really, there's so many things. So it's definitely a career that I would consider because you can always make the switches and start like figuring out what you like more along the way while you're doing it. Obviously, it's not the same being a scientist in the US than, for example, in France or in Uruguay. So those are different scenarios. The US is a very good country, I'd say, to be a scientist. It offers many options, and you can find really whatever you want to do, you can make it happen. So definitely, I would encourage anybody that likes it or would like to explore it to try it. The easier thing to do is to go and try to be a volunteer in a lab. Usually, every lab takes volunteers, so you can go. You have your experience, 2 3 months. You see what the work is about, what you like, what you don't like, and then that would probably help make your decisions. We even have not my lab, but I know the lab next door has a 15-year-old kid rotating with them, like going with them. So any point, any age, you can really reach out and talk to people and start seeing if that's what you like.
That's awesome. I didn't know you could do that, but
Yeah.
that's great for like university students or like high school students that,
Yes.
or just in general, anybody who's decided like, maybe they decided in their 30s, 40s, be like, okay, I want to go work in science now.
Absolutely.
And I guess as one last question, my usual question, what's one piece of advice you would give your younger self?
So for sure, what I would tell my younger self would be don't plan so many things. You're gonna change your mind so many times along the way. Don't stress, don't get so anxious about where are you gonna live or what are you gonna do, and just put the hard work you know you can put and trust that it's gonna be fine, and the choices you're gonna make, trust on them, it should be fine. So that's how I try to live nowadays. I'm usually quite chill nowadays, but before I was obsessing about where am I going, what I will be doing, and like 5 year plans and that kind of thing. And then life and career changed so many times that it was all for nothing, basically. All that anxiety was for nothing. So that would be, I think, my number one advice.
That's awesome. Well, this was so nice to get to know you better. I mean, I know you
Yes.
already, but it was just really lovely to like learn more about the science field, your career path. But yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening.
Bye.